Today we are looking at the Herald of the Sun hero talent tree for the War Within. This is the hero tree that Holy and Retribution Paladins can pick, or at least one of them. So far we've seen at least the first iterations of both of the Resto Druid trees, both of the Holy Paladin trees, and one of the Preservation Evoker trees. Out of all of them that have been released so far, I think Herald of the Sun is probably the best, or at least one of the best, along with the Preservation tree. There's just a lot of good stuff in this tree that I think meets at least most of the criteria Blizzard laid out in their blue post, with only, I guess, one thing missing, but I'll get to that in a minute. First, let's take a look at what the tree is built around, which is Sunspot. After pressing Holy Prism, your next two Holy Power spenders will create a Sunspot on their target, which applies hot for 8 seconds. 10% of all of the damage or healing from the sunspots is also radiated around allies or enemies near those targets. Morning Star works a little bit like the Light of Dawn PvP talent, where for every 5 seconds you gain a stacking buff that increases the damage or healing of your next sunspot by 5%, stacks up to 10 times, and that's on a choice node with 10% more damage or healing from your holy power spenders while a sunspot is active. I imagine that would just be up all the time. We get an interesting one right off the bat with the return of Eternal Flame. This is huge to me. This is probably one of the most exciting talents that any of the healing specs have gotten so far on their hero trees. Eternal Flame is a holy power spender that works just like Word of Glory, except instead of it being an upfront heal, it's instead a hot that lasts 20 seconds. Luminosity increases the critical strike chance of Holy Shock and Light of Dawn by 10%. Illumine causes your sunspots to reduce movement speed of enemies by 50% or increase movement speed of allies by 20%. And that's on a choice node with a passive that increases your movement speed by 5% while above 80% health, and then has a 40% movement speed proc if you're brought below 35% health. Can only occur once every minute. Eternal Sun increases the duration of Sunspot by 2 seconds and Eternal Flame by 3 seconds, and that's on a choice node with Lingering Radiance, which causes your sunspots to also leave an Eternal Flame for 12 seconds on allies or a Greater Judgment on enemies. This is applied upon expiration or being refreshed, which is really nice to see. Sunseer for Holy is quite similar to one of the talents that already exists for Ret, where if you crit with certain abilities, you get like an extra bit of damage or an extra hot. And for Sunseer for Holy, that's going to be on Holy Shock and Light of Dawn. Aurora causes your Holy Prism to also grant Divine Purpose. Solar Grace gives you 4% haste each time you apply a sunspot, so each time you effectively use a holy power spender, and those stacks can overlap. Second Sunrise causes your Holy Shock and Light of Dawn to have a 15% chance to cast again at 30% effectiveness. And the final capstone is that when you press Avenging Wrath, you apply 4 sunspots onto nearby allies or enemies. You increase your damage or healing into those sunspots or by those sunspots by 20%, and then you also become linked to all of your sunspots, so you cause radiant damage or healing to allies that pass through the beams from the linked sunspots. All in all, this tree looks interesting, powerful, impactful, pretty much everything good. Like I said at the very beginning of the video though, it is missing one thing, and that is a defensive. It has the movement speed bonus if you're brought to low health from Will of the Dawn, but apart from that, it's unfortunately missing a defensive. One of the things Blizzard mentioned in their blue post about hero talents is that each tree would have 3 or 4 choice nodes. This one has 3, so that falls into line there, but that also each talent tree would have a defensive, or at least one defensive, and this one doesn't have any. So I'm hoping that that gets addressed at some point, but other than that, I'm actually really quite happy with this tree. We'll have to see how much healing or damage the sunspots themselves do, but even if it is quite minimal, the fact that you should be able to get a lot of value out of it with the 10% of sunspot damage and healing is radiated to nearby allies or enemies from the first passive, and then that your Avenging Wrath causes you to link between all your sunspots and then also do splash damage or healing to nearby allies or enemies while Wings is up is pretty encouraging. You should be able to get a fair bit of value out of this mechanic just from those two passives alone. But even if they aren't a huge part of this talent tree, I would still, or I am still quite happy with it because of the return of Eternal Flame and because some of the talents seem like they're going to do quite a lot for the kind of instant cast style of play, or at least the non-caster style of Holy Paladin play. And that is, I think, what this tree is aimed at. The other tree has some talents that work with using your Infusion of Light procs, whereas this tree really doesn't. This tree is all about your Holy Shocks, so building your Holy Power and then spending your Holy Power with your spenders. Light of Dawn, the addition of Eternal Flame, and obviously Word of Glory, and then Shield of the Righteous for damage. So is there enough damage or healing to be significant but not overshadow the class or spec tree? I would say yes. Like I said, just from the kind of passive nature, that you should be able to get a fair bit of value out of both the first passive and the last capstone. But even if they're weak, the increased crit chance on Holy Shock and Light of Dawn, the critical strikes getting extra value out of Sunseer, your Holy Prism granting Divine Purpose, a haste increase, and the addition of Eternal Flame mean that, yeah, this tree is going to have a lot of value. Are both trees roughly balanced in PvP, Mythic Plus, and Raid? That one's going to be quite difficult to answer for these two trees because we don't know a whole lot about the other tree, the weapons that it's built around, and like how much value we're really going to get out of those. But I could see both trees being pretty valuable in different ways. Does the tree feel required due to one talent feeling mandatory? I don't think so. Eternal Flame could be an issue in this regard. I don't think we'll go back to it, but if anyone remembers playing Holy Paladin back in Cataclysm, Eternal Flame was the main spender of the spec, and the whole spec kind of degenerated in many ways down into really just blanketing your entire raid or group with Eternal Flame as much as possible. I don't imagine that anything like that would return, but Holy Flame could feel somewhat required just because of how much it helps the spec in its moment-to-moment gameplay. One of the things I complained about in the past, or even a couple of months ago, in a video and a couple of forum posts, was that prior to the Holy Paladin rework especially, Holy Paladin in some ways felt like you were constantly building your resource, Holy Power, and then always trying to spend it as fast as possible so you don't overcap it. Balance issues at the moment have kind of made that problem go away a little bit. Your spenders just aren't that powerful, so the fact that you will keep pressing your building abilities like Holy Shock on cooldown, but overcapping your resource isn't a huge problem right now. I mean, it should be, but it's not because of balance. But one of the things that I complained about was that way back in the day, when Holy Paladins were originally built around Holy Power, their main spender was Eternal Flame. So it felt like even if you had to spend Holy Power to not overcap your resource, but there wasn't a lot going on or a lot to heal, you at least had options of spending your Holy Power in a way that gave you value in the future, like Eternal Flame with the healing over time effect. And I thought that with Holy Paladin spenders, at least as far as healing goes, really just becoming either Word of Glory or Light of Dawn, I thought a lot of that like thinking ahead value or decision making was lost. And I'm really excited to see that come back with Eternal Flame. This is probably, like I said before, probably the most exciting talent that any healer has gotten on any of the trees so far, at least for me. I don't know if other people are going to feel the same way, but I really enjoyed Eternal Flame back in the day. I'm really happy to see it return. Does the tree affect your capabilities, rotation, combat focus, or UI? I would say yes to everything. It has the potential to change how you gear with more emphasis on critical strike. Eternal Flame will change how you think about spending your Holy Power, especially for the near future, 10, 20 seconds in advance rather than what health bars look like right now. Holy Prism will turn into much more of a cooldown, and Illumin has some pretty serious potential to be able to allow you to think a lot more about mobility, especially in small groups. And then obviously, finally, the base Sunspot mechanic and the capstone with Avenging Wrath is going to make Wings a more powerful cooldown as well. All this spec really needs is if this gets turned into a defensive or gets some defensive component added to it, I think the tree in general will be in a fantastic place. One of the best trees so far. I'm really excited to hopefully get into beta and be able to test this thing out. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and algorithm stuff.